Welcome to Doc NYC's Spring Showcase, our mid-year celebration of documentary films and series. I'm Bedatri Choudhury, and I am a senior programmer at Doc NYC. And it's my absolute pleasure to be talking to RJ Cutler, director producer of Netflix's Martha that you just watched. Welcome, RJ, and thank you for speaking to us.
Thrilled to be here. Thank you.
First of all, RJ, you have made films on Billie Eilish, on Anna Wintour, on Jim Belushi. So what about this style of making kind of a profile like documentary appeals to you?
It's less the idea of a profile film than it is the opportunity to explore themes and compelling narrative. I mean, as you know, I've also made lots of other documentaries that aren't profile films,
All
and
of them
and
great.
thank you, thank you. But what's compelling me is the opportunity to make a piece of cinema that's I think can be great narrative art. That's what I'm aspiring to. So, a film like Martha Stewart, we're exploring themes of American womanhood in the latter 20th century and early 21st century. A film like Billie Eilish, The World's a Little Blurry, we're exploring themes of family and what it's like to have kids. There are, we could go through all of them and I could tell you what it was that kind of got me into it. But when I met Martha Stewart, I realized that not only was her story extraordinary, but within her story was the opportunity to explore this very rich theme of American womanhood in the latter part of the 20th century, and that's what that and the connection, that I had with her. There's always got to be a connection to the material, to the person, and that's what drew me to Martha.
I'm realizing that I'm wearing too much red, so she won't have approved at all. But how did you? I mean, of course, like, we all know her from growing up, like magazines, TV, and all of those things. But before you made this film, what was your relationship with the idea of Martha Stewart?
Very little, to be honest, which in a way is extremely liberating. I of course knew of her, and I knew of her importance to the culture, but I wasn't a viewer of her show. I didn't own her cookbooks, nor to my, disappointment had I even purchased Entertaining, which is her seminal book and her first book, which is such a masterpiece, and now a book I'm incredibly grateful to have. It's such a thrilling achievement, and I knew roughly the outlines of her story, that she had had this enormous success. I didn't know, for instance, that she was the first self-made female billionaire in American history. I did not know what a visionary she was. I did not know the impact she had on retail in our country and really throughout the world. I didn't know how much she saw synergy before others did. I did not know the extraordinary obstacles that had been placed in front of her. I knew she had had a shocking fall, and that she spent time in prison, but I did not know the circumstances around that, which we, of course, unpack very in great detail in the film. So I didn't know a lot, and that freed me up, I think, in many ways, to see her with great clarity, and to my curiosity really drove this film, and to see her also, not just as someone who has an extraordinary story, but as someone who, for whom it was difficult, someone who hadn't told that story
Mm.
before. And that was also that was in its own way. Simultaneously, I knew she wanted to tell her story. Why else would she have, come to dinner, or asked me if she could, asked a mutual friend if she could join us at dinner, which she did. And yet I knew it was going to be challenging for her, and that gave me a sense that there was something very rich here.
Sorry, I'll have to go back to this dinner. Tell us about this dinner.
Well,
Obviously.
my wife and I are both from Long Island, New York. We spend a couple weeks every summer out in Montauk. Where we like to see friends, and we were having dinner with our friend Alina Cho, who's one of the film's producers, and Alina called in that afternoon and said Martha Stewart would like to join us for dinner, and Jane asked, and I said, "Sounds good to me. Let's have dinner with Martha Stewart." And it was like that. But we were seated next to each other, she and I, and as a result, I learned tremendous amount about her that night. We talked about her upbringing and her family background, and what really, in addition to the things I've talked about, one of the things that really struck me was that her upbringing was in a way very counterintuitive to what
Hmm,
someone who had only peripheral knowledge of her would assume. She did not come from a background of privilege.
hmm,
Which I had just assumed. She was what you see in the film. This is a person who had to literally go to work to feed her family because of the challenges that her father had in keeping a job. So and more and more.
hmm.
One of six children, all so many other things. So I mean, yeah. So there was a lot about Martha that I was drawn to, and that dinner was the starting point of our conversations.
And it's so fascinating to, see this film, see any documentary, but especially about people who are still around and
Mm.
living. Because, like for instance, Billie Eilish, in 10 years, she'll be a completely different person and a different star. And Martha Stewart, who obviously has reinvented her life so many times down the decades, and even now, like she's on the cover of like Swimsuit Illustrated or like, a Sports Illustrated in a swimsuit. So I was, how did you know this was the right time to make this film? Because things keep happening in people's lives, right?
It's such a great question, and I think it applies to all of these films, or anyway, to the ones that I've made. My experience on them is that the films change.
Mm,
You look at the War Room now, it's a completely different movie. Even in the last year, that movie has changed
mm,
because of what's happened to the presidency and campaigns and politics and all of us aging and technology. You look at, sure, the Billie Eilish film is going to change, even though not a frame of it will change. Time
mm,
will change it. Our aging will change it. Our experience, our relationship to the film. And so it's less um, it's less, is this the right time to make a film that isn't going to change? The film will change. What I think about is this the right time for the person who I'm
mm,
making the
mm,
film about? Is there very human need to have their story told in a place now where they want me to tell that story, where they
mm,
want to collaborate on this work of art that is going to be about their life, whatever that means. And I knew that the day I met Billie Eilish,
mm,
it was very clear to me that there was a story yearning to be told from these two kids and this
mm,
family and these parents. And I guess you want to say that that's a filmmaker's instinct and a
mm,
filmmaker's sensibility that I've developed. It was very clear, for instance, that when we met James Carville and George Stephanopoulos, that there was a need to tell their story. Again, it's a very human need, but it doesn't mean that the time is always right.
mm,
Sometimes it's not the right time. And you explore a film with somebody and then decide not to. With Martha, it was clear to me that, again, in spite of the fact that this was a person who had her entire life moved forward and not spent time looking back. I mean, Martha used to say to me, I've never spent a day in therapy in my life. I went once, and 10 minutes into the therapy session, I got up and walked out and told the guy not to send me a bill. That's Martha Stewart. And then she'd say, and now RJ Cutler thinks he's going to get me in the chair and get me to talk about all these things, which she did, because even though it was hard for her, she was ready. She
Mm,
was ready to tell her story at this point in her life. I feel the same about Anna Wintour. When I met her, I could tell she, there was so much that went on at Vogue and so much about who she was. And really, in spite of the fact that people knew the icon, they didn't know the woman. Same with Grace Coddington in that film. So,
mhm,
so that's what I'm looking for. Is the what's the relationship of the human need to have your story told, which we all have,
mm.
to what this process will be, what our connection might be, etc.
You also strike this very, I mean, at the end of the day, you're a documentary filmmaker and not their personal biographer, right? Like you,
Yeah,
and you can feel how you make her uncomfortable with some questions, and you don't stop filming. Like, when you ask a difficult question, especially, I remember when you're asking her about her marriage and infidelity and affairs, you don't stop filming till she gives you an answer. And so I just wanted to know, like, that need to push back, that need to, again, like you're not doing it out of spite, but you are doing it because you're making a truthful film. So how important is that for you?
exactly that important. I mean, that's, I mean, yeah, it's what we're doing. It's as important as the very early conversation I had with Martha the night I met her at that dinner, when we talked about maybe there's a movie to make, together. I was clear with her that if we were to make a movie together, I would have to have final cut, and that's the nature of how we do this, and it's gonna take. We're going to spend years of our lives making it, and we want people to take it seriously. And
Mhm,
people will take a movie seriously if I have final cut, but not if you have final cut. And we agreed. And that's the way, I'm there to tell the truth, and or yeah, and of course, truth is complex, and Martha has her own truths, and we can she is a very interesting, I think, in this film, unreliable narrator, in terms of the words that she uses. But one of the things you learn, in this film, I think, is that people reveal themselves not just in the things they say that are true, but sometimes in the things that they say that aren't true. And
mm,
they reveal themselves not only in the things that they say, but the things that they don't say. And not only in their eagerness to respond, but sometimes in their resistance to respond.
mm,
All of those can be extremely revealing things when you're telling a story. And in a way, you know, that it's a literary kind of construct, the unreliable narrator. But I
mm,
was it's really what this film is built around. And it's very, I find it a very compelling part of the film, and something I was, uh, you know, in a, I'm grateful to Martha for, you know, having those long pauses, for
mhm.
living through, the silences with me,
Yeah.
as she considered the things she wanted to say next, and as she then made choices. You learn so much about Martha, um, again, not just from what she says, but from what she chooses not to say.
Hmm. And also, we learned so much about her, given what people in and around her, in her life and around her, say in the film. And you make this very interesting choice that we only hear their voices, and the only
Hmm.
person we really see sitting down for an interview is Martha Stewart herself. So I
Yeah.
would love for you to talk a little bit about that.
Well, that's a, I just, when I approach a film, one of the first things you think about when you're making a film about somebody is, or at any point, what are the what are the interviews going to be like? And I resist the assumption that we're going to put people in a chair and light them. And I come from a verite background. My first films, The War Room, A Perfect Candidate, American High, and the Billie Eilish film, so many, the September issue, so many of the films that are the foundation, I feel, of my work are verite. When you and my training, it comes at the feet and the hands of D.A. Pennebaker and Chris Hedges, as two of the great masters of verite. And so when that's your background, when the subject of of interviews comes up, you want to be as intentional as possible. You don't want to take anything for granted. I don't. And I don't always respond to seeing people on camera in a chair outside of a narrative environment. I find it can be intrusive, and I don't want. I'm always looking for ways to increase the right brain experience for the viewer. And, somewhat facetiously, I will say in these discussions with my uh, collaborators, there's no interviews in the Godfather. Why do we need an interview in this film? And it's, I'm making the point I'm making, of course, is that the cinematic experience is not dependent on
Mm,
camera interviews. So why should our films be? And that leads to, well, then what will we do for the voices? How will we get these perspectives in? With Martha, we did a few interviews with people on camera, and I had that kind of negative reaction to it. Martha on camera, I was very excited about, but others on camera didn't. It wasn't making sense to me, but then when we were just hearing voices, it did make sense to me. And one of the things that instantly started to happen was that Martha became centered in the film in a way that she wasn't otherwise. And that
mm,
was a very exciting discovery. First of all, because Martha Stewart's story has been told many times in many different ways, but never by Martha herself. And
mm,
that was something I felt not only that she deserved, but that I wanted the film to be achieving. At the same time, it also underscored this aspect of Martha as unreliable narrator that we've
mm.
talked about. So that was very exciting to me. Those two things, and there we were. So with every film, we always talk about the box, and the reason we talk about the box is um, when we were researching Listen to Me, Marlon, John Batzik and I produced that film, Stephen Riley directed. And when John and I were in the research stage, I met once with Mike Medavoy, who was the executor of Brando's estate. Mike is a legendary, Hollywood studio executive and producer, and he was the executor of Brando's estate. And we were talking about at the beginning of the process about maybe making this film, he said, well, nobody's ever looked in the boxes. And I was like, what boxes? It was like, the boxes that were locked up by the family. What boxes were locked up by the family? Well, all of Marlon's tapes. What tapes? The audio tapes. He recorded everything his whole life. What? And then so into the archive we went. We unsealed the boxes and that had never been looked through, and there was a movie to be made.
Mm,
And
mm,
I had a similar experience with the John Belushi film, and in this case, the the riddle was solved by using a narrative voice only. I'm sorry, using off-camera interview only, except for Martha.
So what was in Martha's box?
Martha
Metaphorical
Stewart.
box.
Martha Stewart on camera was the key. Was
Yeah.
the key. And all these, I mean, probably 50 other people who have, as you say, everybody's got a perspective on Martha,
Mm,
but it was the privileged position of Martha in the narrative in all of her complexity. That was what was in her box was Martha Stewart.
mm,
And what a rich one it was, because there she is the only person, um, the only on camera interview.
mm. In the you spend a big chunk of the film, like I think, and I think it comes literally at the midpoint of the film, her days the days she spent in incarceration, and which, in interviews she said it was only 150 days out of an 80 plus year life. So I think it's important, and I think it's important because sometimes when she says things about her days in incarceration, she's actually talking about the problems of incarceration in this country, which you don't think someone like Martha Stewart, who's teaching you how to fold puff pastry, would ever go through. So it's important for us to hear that from her. At least that was my reading as an audience. I want to know why you chose to spend so much time on those days, on those 150 days.
Well, it's I think a defining part of her life. I respect that Martha said after the movie was made that she thinks of it as a vacation, but I'm grateful to her for having shared with me her diaries
Mm,
that were written in the moment that are featured in the film that show the experience that she was going through and a great transformation and a dark night of the soul, where
mm,
she wonders she must under those circumstances face the question of what the meaning of her life is and as you know this is listen, documentary has a requirement to an obligation to the truth, but it's a movie. And here's my
mhm,
the central character in this movie is going through an extraordinarily challenging experience being imprisoned and losing her fortune and losing the company she built.
mm, mhm,
And we have an incredible window into it through her diaries and are able to bring it to life in the way that the film does. So it's very it's and she transforms and she rises to the challenge and she
mm,
finds her transformation in her in not only in her um, kind of truest identity, which is as a teacher, but in the thing that connects her back to her father, which
mm,
is the narrative structure of the film. There's so much that um, that that gets in her way that connects to her father, but there's so much that allows her to find a freedom and a truth, and that she becomes a teacher and she teaches her
mm,
fellow inmates, and that gets her through
mm,
and helps her return on the other side changed. And
mm,
so that's the story that I experienced as I learned more and more about Martha, and as she was, incredibly courageous enough to share her diaries with me,
mm, mhm.
um, and um, and 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 to, and once she shared them with me, I was then, you know, able to you put them in the film, and there they are, and you see all that. So that's what
Yeah.
drove all of the time that we spend in prison.
Well,
It's not that much time.
no, it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I for one, I'm very glad that you focused on it because it is very important, and and there was a point in the film where I was like, is she going to do prison reforms because she's so close to the I mean, and I will not heighten it by saying yes she did, but when she talks about the woman who was gardening in the prison,
Of course.
and and she definitely did change a little bit of those women's
She
lives.
touched lives. She
Yeah.
touched lives, and you feel the emotion when they speak
Hmm.
to the experience.
Yeah.
People are changed. And listen, this is part of what the film is. Martha's a very powerful person. She
Hmm.
changes lives. She changed the world. She changed business. She changed culture. She changed, there's so much. She changed publishing. She on and
Hmm.
on. This is the kind of foundation of the film. We're telling a story about a visionary genius. but who is very much a human being, and the her parents' daughter, and her ex-husband's ex-wife and her daughter's mother, and
Mm.
that's the story. That's what we're after in these films.
I know we're at time, but I can go on talking to you about this film and your other works.
Thank you.
But you were making, and it's a great film, which is why we're showing it. But
Thank you.
you were also making this film for a person who, to a grave fault, is a perfectionist. Did that play, did that, I mean, you've made too many films to be nervous, but like, did that play, was that at the back of your head that, I'm making this film about a woman who is like notorious for her, perfectionist streak, which is why I love the ending so much, where she says, we can deal with imperfection a little bit.
She
But
changes. She changes. Right?
yeah, so I was
Yes.
wondering if
That
that
there
ever,
isn't a moment that's unintentional in this film.
yeah.
So, but uh, what? How? No, no, I don't. I'm just trying to make the best film, the truest, best, most compelling piece of cinema that I can, and to get into all of the complexities. And listen, it is extremely difficult to be the subject of a film, to have spent your life being in control of your narrative and your image, and then to give that control over to somebody else. um, and I have a tremendous amount of empathy
Hmm.
for the people I make films about, because I ask them to do. That's the arrangement we make, is that they're going to, and often they are very, people who have a lot of control, and so it becomes challenging when they see it. And so I'm very empathic. I try to be, and I want to be, and so but it's not a question of, the making of the film isn't impacted like by that. And so um Martha's perfectionism, which is one of the subjects of the film, and one of the, as we say as is said very early on in the film, what is the price paid.
Hmm.
um that's what we're exploring, and that's okay. And so, I love Martha's full range of responses to the film, the way she reacted, the dozens of hours of conversations we've had about it, the deepening of our friendship that came as a result of her, of her seeing the film, the great appreciation she's developed for it, and because of the reaction that so many people have had to it. She really, her life story has really, I mean, it's tens of millions of people saw this film, and so many, especially, she says, young women speak to her about the impact it's had on them. That's a very, I'm grateful for that, and for her appreciation of that. So, but in the making of it, no, I don't really. I try not to think about that. I'm trying to think about the film.
Thank you so much, RJ, for sharing your film with us and for chatting with us here today. And for everyone watching this, please continue to enjoy Spring Showcase programming that goes through June 13th. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. What a pleasure.